It is my pleasure to introduce Judith Huntington, President-elect of the College of New Rochelle. She will be the 13th President of the College of New Rochelle, having spent 18 years affiliated with the college, 10 years as Vice President for Financial Affairs. Judy is very familiar with schools, having spent a number of years as a member of the Board of Education in the Yorktown Public Schools in Westchester County. Thank you, Judy, for joining us today as we grapple with these critical educational issues. Judy Huntington.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really delighted to be here, but really more delighted to see all of you here today, and thank you for being present with us. Today's panel discussion will address some of the most critical issues facing education today. And it's through the collaboration and sharing and exchange of information today that we'll be able to begin to sort of unpack and address these complex and interrelated issues that we're all currently facing. What better place for the exchange of information than the College of New Rochelle? A 107-year-old teaching institution with a mission dedicated to service, with a particular emphasis on education and social justice, which is derived directly from our founding order, the Ursuline Sisters, who just celebrated their 475th anniversary of the founding of their order by St. Angelo Merici of Northern Italy. The college's mission is delivered in each of its 4 schools and can be described as an institution that's committed to the liberal arts as a cornerstone of its educational model, with a particular emphasis to educating women in the Ursuline tradition and charism, and providing access to education to those populations previously bypassed and overlooked. As many of you already know, the college operates very much like a university and follows a university model, offering its programs through 4 deans and the Dean of. As you know, we have the School of Arts and Sciences, the School of Nursing, the Graduate School, and the School of New Resources, which is our 4-year accelerated degree program, which is offered here in New Rochelle and at 5 other branch campuses located in New York City. We're present in Co-op City. We have a John Cardinal O'Connor campus in the South Bronx, the Rosa Parks campus in Harlem, Brooklyn, and the District Council 37 campus. In total, the college currently serves nearly 5,000 students and has awarded degrees to more than 40,000 alumni, many represented in the field of education. This forum is sponsored by the college's Center for Educational Policy and Practice and co-sponsored by the Alumni Office with the cooperation of Southern Westchester and Putnam Northern Westchester BOCES. So I thank you all for your participation and efforts, particularly Walter. We owe a debt of gratitude to the leadership and generosity of Sandra Priest Rose, one of our graduates who devoted most of her life to education, and particularly to reading reform. Sandra was instrumental in launching CNR Center for Educational Policy and Practice. The center provides research and engages in initiatives such as improving the liberal arts core in teacher preparation and in mathematics. The goal of the center is to examine educational trends and best practices regionally and nationally from pre-kindergarten through college. And how fortunate the College of New Rochelle is to have right here in-house Dr. Walter Sullivan, a nationally recognized authority, experienced and skilled in the field of education, leading the college's Center for Excellence, Education, Policy, and Practice. Walter is an associate professor of educational leadership and a retired superintendent of schools, and is the facilitator of this forum. So I'm not only proud, but really privileged to turn this back over to Walter, who will now begin the forum. Thank you, Walter.
Thank you very much, Judy. We also wish you tremendous success in your new adventure as the president of the College of New Rochelle. We're here to support you. The special commitment of the college in the Ursuline tradition of service, social justice, and education is truly the hallmark of this college. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the presence of our cooperating partners. Dr. Jim Langlois, the District Superintendent of the Putnam Northern Westchester BOCES, and Sandra Simpson, Chief Executive Officer of the Southern Westchester BOCES, who are with us tonight. A special word of thanks to Richard Domenech, who is the Superintendent of New Rochelle Public Schools, the district where the college is located. I'd also like to acknowledge the Vice President for College Advancement, Brenna Mayer, Director of Alumni, Kelly Brennan, who she and her staff have worked tirelessly on this forum. Lenore Carpinelli, John Coyne, and Andrea Fagan, who worked in the College Relations Office. We want to thank them. Maggie Edmiston, Special Events Coordinator, and her great staff. Mark and Marie Ropick, who have done a lot of the sound work for us and also the PowerPoint and so on. We want to thank them. My secretary, Ann Hull, and of course the tremendous presenters who have given so generously of their time to enhance the knowledge and to stimulate our thoughts as we grapple with these incredibly challenging times. The special abbreviated bio of the presenters is on the tables along with a timetable of the activities for this afternoon. Very briefly, the Changing Face of Education 2011 theme has its purpose in bringing various educators together as a community to share information on the rapid educational changes from a national perspective, from a New York State perspective, while simultaneously addressing curriculum initiatives such as the ELA and mathematics, although we will not be dealing with math tonight because of the volume of work in this forum. And also, this is occurring with the teacher and principal effectiveness model in New York State, conditioning many of the discussions that have taken place in the press. This is no small task, what we have in front of us, but we wanted to present the information holistically in a manner that ties these areas together. These initiatives have major impact on our students, our staff, and our nation's schools. I think of my 4 little grandkids, and who are, all 4 of them are under 3, and 1 on the way, and I say to myself, what kind of education do we want for our kids and our grandkids? And Dan will address that, I'm sure, given the fact that we have tight budgets and the fiscal climate both in the nation and in the state is simply extraordinary. We wanted to bring together administrators, teachers, college staff, and our students in this collective endeavor so that we all hear the same message, we all discuss it with a sense of community. We are all invested in the education of our students, and we are here to listen, to learn, and most importantly, to support each other in the mission of educating our students to the best of our ability, the highest possible calling that anyone could have, the education of children. The headlines that we see day in and day out, and I'm sure Dan will address this, are simply overwhelming. Just to talk about today, very briefly, in the New York Times, teachers wonder why the heapings of scorn. The jabs Erin Parker has heard about her job have stunned her. Oh, you pathetic teachers. Read the online comments and placards. You are glorified babysitters who leave work at 3 p.m. You deserve minimum wage. You feel punched in the stomach, said Ms. Parker, a high school science teacher in Madison. And then the article in today's paper goes on to say, around the country, many teachers see demands to cut their income benefits and having a say in how the schools are operated. But in the end, what society seems to be questioning is the value of this incredible vocation to society. And it goes on in that vein. This is just one of the press media that have really flooded both our airways and our papers. And I'm sure Dan will address that as well. So as a context, that is the context that we've been dealing with over the last couple of months for sure. We are extraordinarily pleased to have Dr. Daniel Domenech, Executive Director of the American Association of School Administrators, set the stage for our forum. Dr. Domenech has more than 36 years of experience in public education. 27 of those years he has served as Superintendent of Schools in the Deer Park, Long Island School District, similar to Richard, the New Rochelle Superintendent. And he was the District Superintendent of the Suffolk BOCES. He has been President of the New York State Council of School Superintendents, Senior Vice President for National Urban Markets with McGraw-Hill Education. Prior to that position, he served for 7 years as Superintendent of Schools in the Fairfax County, Virginia Public Schools, the 12th largest school system in the nation. Dan earned a bachelor's degree from Hunter College and a PhD from Hofstra University. Of the many individuals involved in education in Washington, D.C., I personally trust his instincts and his care for our students the most. He is committed to the highest education for all of our nation's students. He has actually worked in schools as a teacher, as a superintendent, and unlike so many other influential policymakers on the national stage, he actually knows about education, knows about teaching and learning. We have been friends for many years, and I am ecstatic that Dan is able to be with us today as our keynoter. Welcome home to New York, Dan.
Thank you very much, Walter. Hello there, New Rochelle. Hey. I've got to feel like a different venue. I don't want to say like, I was in Montgomery, Alabama yesterday. I don't want to say, hello, Montgomery, Alabama. Bad, very bad when you do that. No, but it really is great to be back in New York. I am a New Yorker. And I'm very proud of the fact that this is the only place that I can come to and nobody says I have a funny accent. I can say Long Island, okay? But I am a New Yorker. I spent the better part of my life in New York, and I love to come back, Walter, so thank you so much for inviting me to join you. I have a very unique picture, and I'm in a very unique position relative to everything that's going on in the country, because I have been at all of the stages. I was a 6th grade teacher in Cambria Heights in New York, and I was a administrator on Long Island, and proud of being one of the first to establish bilingual education outside of New York City, and actually become the founder and one of the co-founders and first president of the New York State Association for Bilingual Education. So I have a long history here. I even have a history, which I may or may not tell you if we have time, of having been the chancellor of New York City schools for 1 day. But let me tell you, that was a hell of a day. Not a child failed. Nobody was left behind. It was a great, great day. But that's another story. But when I was putting this PowerPoint together, I actually put my public relations picture, which is my high school graduation picture, on this thing. And my assistant thought because I wanted, it's the changing face of education. But my assistant thought I made a mistake and put the real picture up there. It just made, that's not what I wanted to show there. But I have a view of education that few people have, because I do get to see not only what's happening all around the country, but I have an inside view in terms of what's happening in our nation's capital. And in essence, what's really going to affect education policy in the years to come. And we happen to have an excellent working relationship with this administration. Yesterday I was just thrilled to have been at the White House with the First Lady, Michelle Obama, and the Secretary of Education. We were together for about an hour planning this Let's Move initiative that the First Lady has to get kids healthy and deal with the obesity issue. And we've been at the White House with the President a number of times. So it gives us, particularly someone in my position, it gives us the opportunity to have a seat at the table and to know that we can dialogue with the Secretary of Education formally and informally, or go to the Hill and deal with the senators and the congressmen as they're shaping education policy, and make them hear us, because that's a whole different ballgame. And I'm so happy to see that, we have a governor in New York State now, like father, like son. He's trying to do exactly what his dad did to us superintendents when I was the president of the New York State Council of School Superintendents, and he capped the BOCES superintendent salaries way back then. But he wants to go one up on that. He wants to cap all superintendent salaries. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. I think I have some ideas and opinions on that particular issue. But before we get to New York, I do want to cover some ground, and I think Walter did a great job of putting it in context in terms of what we see going on around the country right now. And if you recall, if you go back 2 years from this last fall, okay, if you go back 2 years from this last fall, you'll remember that things were great. Everything was moving along. I took this job in July of 2008 after having a very successful run in the private sector with McGraw-Hill Education, because I had been a superintendent for 27 years. And I had also been a president of the American Association of School Administrators and was very familiar with the organization. And so when they asked me to become the executive director and in essence be the chief advocate for public education and superintendents in America, I said, hey, that's what I want to do. That's great. That's exactly what I want to do at this point in my life. So I went to Washington with a very different frame of mind. I went there with growth and change and reform and all these wonderful things that we were going to do to education, because we were really poised to do the job. We were really ready to do the job and do the things that we knew had to be done. But you'll recall that November, all of a sudden the bottom fell out of the economy. I mean, it's totally unexpected. No one saw this thing coming down the tracks. But sure enough, it did. And we've been in a downward spiral since, economically. In all my years in education, it's hard to remember a year where your budget was actually lower than the previous year. That hardly ever happened in education. It was always a little bit higher. And we always complained, we never have enough money, we never have enough to do the things that we do. But the budget always went up, always went up, always went up. Well, for the last 3 years, across the country, education budgets have been going down, down, down. They're going to go down again this coming school year. And they're going to go down again the year after that. So we're going to see 5 years of continuous economic decline and budget declines in education. And we're already seeing the impact of that after just 3 years. Class sizes have increased around the country. Why? Because we're firing teachers left and right. So class sizes are increasing. We've decimated programs. I mean, there are districts around the country that no longer offer summer school. There are districts that have had to do with their after-school program. There are districts that have gone to 4 days of school week, particularly in the Midwest, where they go Monday through Thursday and that's it, in order to save money. And everybody has done the little stuff. Cutting back on transportation, cutting back on co-curricular activities. All of that has been done. All of that is gone. And the only thing that's left are the people that work for the system. That's all that's left to cut. And that's all that's going to be cut in the years to come. So we're seeing an unprecedented period of time that's having a huge impact on education. Now, the administration, Arne Duncan and President Obama, think about it. When the president was elected, okay, the economy was not the agenda. That was not part of the debate during that whole presidential election. It was only almost that last week when the bottom fell out and McCain made the mistake of saying, "What economic problems?" Then all of a sudden Obama's shot up in the polls, and people said, "What, you know, we're not going to vote for somebody who doesn't even realize what's happening in this country." So he was elected and came into a situation that really he was not ready for, to be perfectly honest. And he began to deal with the situation as best that he could. And I had the opportunity to work closely with his transition team as he was coming on board, particularly in the area of education. And one of the ideas that first came up was the fact that here's an opportunity for us to spend a lot of federal dollars in education like we've never had before. And if you're familiar at all with the federal budget is all Title I, IDEA, all things considered for education. It's probably a little bit over $20 million. Well, when he put together a package for education, it was $100 billion. I mean, I almost fell off the chair. I said, I can't believe this. $100 billion for education. Woo-hoo! We're going to have a party. Think of all the great things we're going to be able to do in education right now. We're going to be able to reduce class sizes even further, you know, pay teachers better, buy all kinds of equipment and supplies, fix facilities that are run down. It's going to be great. Well, a funny thing happened to that $100 billion on the way to the states and on the way to the districts. It never got there. Because you see, what happened was that state governments and localities cut back on their education contribution to the extent of the federal dollars. Now, there are some exceptions to that around the country, but not many. Because in most states, that's exactly what happened. So the reality is that today, on my way down here, I'm on the train, I'm doing an interview with a newspaper from Arizona who wants to know where that $100 billion went and where are the gains and the reforms that we were promised. And I said, they're nowhere. They don't exist. Because we never got the $100 billion. Look at your state's budget and look at your district's budget and see that it is less today than it was 2 years ago. So that $100 billion went into a pit that simply supplanted money that was already there from states and localities. The worst part is that next year, that money runs out. And that's what you're seeing playing out right now all across the country. That money is going to run out, and the states can't make up the difference. They can't go back up to the level of contribution that they were at before. And at the local level, particularly in a state like New York, where so many of us are so dependent on the local property tax, well, you know where that's at. Until property taxes begin to increase, and that's not going to happen until property values begin to increase, that money is not going to be there either. So there's no more federal dollars, the states don't have enough money, and the localities don't have enough money. And that leaves us, education and the schools, holding the proverbial bag. And at the same time, trying to explain what happened to the money. Now this year, many of you realize there is an attempt in Congress to reauthorize what is known as the Elementary, Secondary, and Education Act, or No Child Left Behind, as was Bush's name for the law. And some interesting things are happening that we have to point out, again, to put in context of all of these things that are going on. You know, Title I ESEA was passed in 1965 by Lyndon Johnson. And it was the first time that the federal government got involved in education because, as you all know, the federal government has no role in education. The Constitution is silent about the federal government's role in education. Therefore, it has none. The Constitution says that it is the state that has the responsibility to provide a system of public education. Each state has that responsibility. The federal government has no responsibility. So therefore, the federal government had never been involved in education. But the road to education for the federal government was civil rights. The fact that education is a civil right. The fact that if a child is not getting that equal education opportunity, their civil right is being violated. And so ESEA, the Elementary, Secondary, and Education Act, was a means of putting federal dollars into school to provide for children of poverty, who were the children whose civil rights were being violated, who were not getting the equity, the equality that they should have been getting in order to get the same education as the white children in the schools. And that goes back to 1965. By the way, there's a lot of supporting evidence for this. And one of them is the National Assessment for Educational Progress, the NAEP, what we know as our nation's report card. And you can't see this in the back, so I'll just interpret it for you. If you can see the bottommost line, it's a red line, and probably what you can see is that it has a downward slope. And the reason why it has a downward slope is because this is the scores on the NAEP. So this goes from low to high. So these are high scores, these are low scores. Down here, what we have is the percentage of kids on free and reduced lunch. At this end, the percentage of kids on free and reduced lunch is less than 10. At that end, the percentage of kids on reduced lunch is greater than 75. You don't have to be a math major to figure it out, right? The greater the concentration of poverty, the lower the scores. Okay? And what the red line represents are the kids that are on free and reduced lunch. And here's an interesting phenomenon. The same kids of poverty, if they're in a school that has a low concentration of poverty, they do better than if they're in a school that has a high concentration. But here's even a more startling phenomenon. The middle line is the average of the two. The top line is a green line, and that also has a descending slope. And those are the kids that are not on free and reduced lunch. They're not on free and reduced lunch, but they suffer from the same effect. If they happen to be in a school with a high concentration of kids of poverty, their scores are significantly lower than their colleagues who are in schools with low poverty concentration. Bottom line, it's almost a 100% correlation, a negative correlation, but a correlation, a very solid correlation, that poverty affects achievement in our schools. Not a secret, not brain science, common sense. And Lyndon Johnson recognized that. And so that was the intent of the Elementary, Secondary, and Education Act, to attempt to equalize in schools where there were large concentration of children of poverty, to attempt to provide them with the additional funding and means to equalize the educational process. Let's jump ahead from 1965 to now, back to the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, what we affectionately call ARRA. 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 It's like you're going to bark or something. In the Washington, D.C. area. It's interesting to see that what this administration has done with the stimulus funds, okay, is to use those funds to drive education policy. It really is brilliant, if you think about it. Without a shot being fired in Congress, without a single debate, this administration has inserted its education policy into all of our schools through that $100 billion contribution. They have gotten states to sign up and school districts to sign up to do things that they would never have done were it not for the fact that federal dollars were dangled under their noses, and they jump at the opportunity to get those dollars. Okay? So, Race to the Top is a perfect example of that. Perfect example of that. The state stabilization dollars was a perfect example of that. 48 out of 50 districts signed up, for state stabilization funding. And in signing up, okay, nobody read the fine print. Nobody read what they were going to be obligated to do and report on as of this September. And one of the things that I'm very much involved in right now with the department is trying to formulate with the department a plan for what's going to happen here. Because as I go around the country, I can tell you right now that out of 100 superintendents I meet, maybe one has an inkling of what's coming down the track. The majority of school systems in America have no idea what's going to hit them this September. And what's going to hit them is a requirement for an incredible amount of data, an incredible amount of information that will make this administration the most intrusive administration we've ever had in local affairs. The most intrusive. They are going to want to know the grade that every child gets in every subject that they take. They're going to want to know the teacher that gave them that grade. They're going to want to know the percentage of kids that graduate from high school and have signed up for a college level course. They're going to want to know the percentage of kids that graduated from high school and have completed a semester of college. They're going to want to know how you evaluate your teachers. They're going to know the procedure that you use in evaluating your teachers and how you evaluate your teachers. They're going to compare that data to the grades that those teachers gave kids. Nobody knows that this is coming, but it is. It's a requirement. Governors, when they sign that on that dotted line for the stabilization dollars, that's what they agreed they were going to do. It's going to be a huge, huge issue. But it's a result, again, of policy being driven not by Congress, not by legislation, but by requirements if you wanted the dollars. These are the areas that are the assurances that states had to provide in order to get that federal funding. College and career ready. Okay? Standards and high quality. Okay? This is what's giving birth to the core, Common Core standards. Okay? Which, by the way, there's a huge debate going on because the National Governors Association and all of the state's superintendent don't want the feds to do this. They don't want these to be federal standards. They want them to be standards that the states adopt voluntarily. Okay, so that's this whole process that's taking place right now. And over 42 states have signed on to these Common Core standards, but they had to in order to get the money. See? You didn't sign on the dotted line that you were going to adopt those standards, you weren't going to get the money. So they had to do that. You know, the pre-K to higher education data systems. And this is where all of this data plays out. I mean, you were supposed to use, states were supposed to use that money to have the ability to collect the data, but, you know, states didn't use it for that. They used it to fill their budget gaps. That's the whole problem, see? They didn't use the money for what the money was intended for. They used it to fill in budget gaps. So that hasn't happened. Teacher effectiveness, and you've got an issue with that here, okay? Because when New York State signed on for this, okay, as a result of that, you have a new process for evaluating teachers and principals. Okay? And of course, effective intervention for lowest performing schools. Talk about intrusion. Now we have the government telling a superintendent and a board of education that if they want this money, you got to fire your principal. In all the models, you have to fire the principal. That principal is gone. Okay? Bye-bye principal. One of the models, you got to fire half of the staff. The other model, you just close the school. And the other model, you turn it over to a management group or a charter school. Those are the models. And we keep saying, where's the beef? Where's the research, that supports these models as being the things that's going to bring about school transformation? This isn't transformation. This isn't even reform. This is trying to go back to the 60s or 50s and attempting to do what we did then. I mean, that's not how reform and that's not how transformation takes place. And there are thousands of examples across the country of schools that have been transformed. And it hasn't been done that way. It hasn't happened that way. But these are basically the core issues, core tenets of this administration's policy that are being implemented now, again, without ESEA being reauthorized. Okay? We haven't even gotten to that point. By the way, after all these states ran to apply for the money, only 12 states got funded. On the first round, only 2, and then eventually others. New York is in there. Congratulations, New York. You got funded. You got Race to the Top money. But you know what? A lot of the other states didn't. And now you have all these new governors that were elected. 30 new governors were elected in November. 30. And a lot of these, and most of them Republicans. And we're hearing about that from all around the country. And a lot of those governors are saying, I didn't sign this. I didn't sign this, and I didn't get the money. So, don't ask us for this stuff because we didn't get the money. So that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. In this map that you can't see back there, but if you can see the colors, that's all you need to know. On the upper left hand, those are the states, okay, who agreed to charter schools when they didn't have that legislation just to get the Race to the Top money. On that over here are the states that agreed to using student achievement as a database for teacher interviews. None of those states had that in their laws. Here, the overhauling lower achieving schools, including firing teachers and principals. Again, that green, all states that did it just to get the money. And the last one is the common set of math and reading standards for students. Look at all the green there. Again, districts, when I've gone to these states and I've asked, the people, it says, did you read the standards? No. But you adopted them. Oh, yeah. But you didn't read them. No. We wanted to get the money. That's why we signed on. Huge issues. The other one is the Innovation Fund. Here again, school districts and organizations tripping over one another, to get a chunk of money at a time when money is needed. Again, you can't see it, but I'm going to read it for you. The districts that got these dollars, okay, number 1, KIPP Foundation. Public school system? No. Oh, let's go to the next. Success for All Foundation. Public school system? No. Oh, let's go for Teach for America. No. Okay. And as you go down the line, you see basically part of the administration's agenda here. And I think that's been part of the problem that we're facing today, and it's playing out. Arne Duncan's a great guy. He truly loves kids and believes in education. But Arne Duncan is a non-traditional educator. Okay? He never taught in a classroom. He was never a principal. He was in community advocacy like the president. Okay, and he ran the Chicago schools when he was appointed to do so by the mayor. Now, to his credit, Arne Duncan recognizes that, so he opens himself up to folks like me, to be able to tell him about what goes on in schools and in classrooms, etc. But nevertheless, his affinity tends to move towards all of these non-education institutions. Foundations, organizations that are not part of the traditional format and who truly believe that they have the solution for transforming and reforming education. And worse than that those of us that are traditional educators don't know what we're doing. Not only do we not know what we're doing, but we resist making the necessary changes that will improve the lives of our kids. And last September, how many of you saw Waiting for Superman here? Okay, so a good number. I refuse to see it, by the way. I wouldn't go. I didn't want to see it. I don't care. I don't want to see it. I'm not waiting for Superman. Superman's here already. In school districts across America, in classrooms across America, doing a job every day. Is it a shame that there are children in communities like the ones depicted in Waiting for Superman who are getting a poor education so that parents have to be part of a draft, a lottery, and able to get their child into a school that will help that child? Absolutely, it's a shame. But if it's a shame, it has nothing to do with the people that are trying to make a difference for those kids. One of the things that I try to point out in Washington is that before you start telling us what to do in our schools, why don't you start looking at the laws that you've put in place that are preventing us from doing the kinds of things that we'd like to do in schools? I mean, we have states right now in a day of online education, in a day of technology, where we know that the school walls are no longer necessary because the world is our school. In this day and age, the majority of states in this country at the state level still have laws requiring kids to be physically present in the classroom, their butts in a seat, in order to get credit for the course. Well, how get rid of that? That's not going to help. That's not going to allow us to use technology the way that technology could be used. In my now adopted state of Virginia, in Virginia it is against the law to begin school before Labor Day. We call it the King's Dominion Bill. Why? Because King's Dominion is a large amusement park in Virginia. And it is the amusement industry that lobbies to prevent schools from starting before, because they don't want to lose that big weekend. So I go to Fairfax County as superintendent of schools, and I am hell-bent on implementing year-round education until I get a call from the state superintendent and says, you can't do that. I go, why not? He says, because it's against the law. He says, you've got to be kidding. Actually, I said something worse than that. So what I had to do is that I had to apply for waivers school by school. I had 264 schools in Fairfax County. And I had to put in waivers in order to get our schools to go year-round because it was against the state. And they would only allow me to do it for about 34 schools. I couldn't do it system-wide. Now that's a law. So, you know, we all know, we see the research, you know, we all read about the loss of learning over the summer months and all of these things. It makes sense, particularly for the kids that are being left behind. The very kids that need it. The very kids that need to be in a school environment year-round, we can't do it for them because of laws that prevent us from doing it. And of course, one of the biggest battles going on right now at the national level, and we see it playing out, and it's a very touchy issue, is this whole issue that, in essence, is about teacher tenure, teacher seniority, and collective bargaining. There are, of the 50 states, there are 35 states that have collective bargaining provisions, and 15 that do not. And the corporate reformers, which is, by the way, Diane Ravitch has become a rock star. We had our national conference 2 weeks ago in Denver, and Diane was one of our keynote speakers, and she got the most sustained, longest standing ovation that I've ever seen a speaker get at one of our conferences. I mean, she is like a rock star. She tells what we all want to hear. She says it like it is. But she basically, you know, has defined these individuals as corporate reformers. You know, the Gates, the Wallace Foundation, Broad, and a lot of these other individuals with a lot of money who are putting a lot of money on the table. We can only assume and hope that it is with the best of intentions, that they're really trying to make a difference in education. But they're pushing in a very strong direction. And one of those directions that has been picked up by many of the newly elected Republican governors around the country is this thing that the teachers are the problem. Witness what Walter just read before, a teacher in Wisconsin. Okay, teachers are the problem, and they're the ones to blame. And they're laggards and lazy, and it is painting public education in America as a failure. All of public education in America as a failure. When the reality is that that's not the case. That's not the case. I served on the National Assessment Governing Board, and there was somebody here who served with me too. Where are you? Well, she came in to say hello, I guess, and left. But yeah,
She'll take it personally.
she saw my picture and said, "Hell, that's not the guy I served with." But, you know, if you look at the National Assessment for Educational Progress, which is the nation's report card, and you were to look at the 4th and 8th grade reading scores, okay? Never have our 4th and 8th grade reading scores been higher. This is the highest that they've ever been, okay? Look at the math scores for 4th and 8th grade. They've never been higher. This is the highest that they've ever been. Our dropout rate. Has our dropout, I mean, are kids now dropping out more than they ever did before? No. Our graduation rate. Has our graduation rate ever been higher? No. So what are we talking about? Why are we penalizing and judging public education and defining public education based on the 5% of the schools in this country that are failing? So that the failing schools are defining all of public education. A movie like Superman talks only about situations and districts and locations and never mentions the fact that there are so many other outstanding schools around the country where kids are getting a solid education. I mean, the United States doesn't lead the world because we have a failing education system. And the part I love best is the comparisons that are made. International comparisons. You know, Finland, #1. Well, hell, I've been to Finland. And Finland is the size of Montana. And it's got 5 million residents. And when I walked into their schools, I didn't see a single black face, or a single brown face, or a single yellow face. Okay? It's a highly homogeneous, middle-class community. So if you want to compare somebody to Finland, compare New Rochelle to Finland. You know, compare Westchester County to Finland. Compare the state of Massachusetts to Finland. But don't compare a country with 50 million students with incredible diversity to a homogeneous nation of 5 million with a smaller population than New York City in terms of kids. As a matter of fact, I said to the Secretary of Education in Finland, a very nice lady, I said, with all due respect, ma'am, I don't think a single one of your teachers would last a day in the South Bronx. And you know what? They would not. You know that. I know that. I taught in the South Bronx. It wouldn't happen. And now the new kid on the block that has the #1 spot is Singapore. Not Singapore, Shanghai. Shanghai is now #1 on the list. Shanghai, a portion of China. Well, why aren't we compared to China? Now all of a sudden, we're compared to sections of countries. You know, in Shanghai, well, you know, when I go to Shanghai, and I've been to Shanghai, all I see is Chinese kids. Really? Even the dogs speak Chinese. You know, so they're ridiculous. They're comparisons that have no basis. And by the way, a point that Diane Ravitch makes is that we are actually scoring the highest we've ever scored on the international tests. Because we used to be like 56th, and we're all the way up to 23 now. But I mean, they're just invalid conclusions. And you know what? And so when you say to them, it's okay, let's compare us to Finland. Let's do that. Okay? How about the fact that Finland teachers are among the highest paid in the country. How about that? Oh, by the way, and Finland has a very strong union. And when you're hired to be a teacher in Finland, you're hired for life. You have tenure forever. Okay? And in Finland, by the way, every teacher gets at least 3 weeks of professional development a year. 3 weeks. Okay? So how about it? Let's be like the Finns. But that's not the comparisons that are made, because of course that doesn't make sense. That would require us to spend a lot of money. You know, the Common Core standards make sense, if only from the point of view that if we're going to be engaged in this international comparison stuff, then we can't have 50 sets of standards comparing us to one outside of the United States. All of these other countries, Finland, China, Singapore, Hong Kong, they all have one set of standards. We have 50. Okay? So that doesn't work. So we need to have just one set of standards, but we don't want to let the federal government do that. The one thing that the federal government should do, we're not going to let them do, because the states, you know, want to maintain their sovereignty. And they say, you have no role in education, and we're not going to let you, we're not going to give you a president to have a role in education. So you're not going to get to set a national standard. We are. And just like they won't let the federal government develop a national test, although they should. But the reality is that we need to come, but you know what, let's not lose sight of the fact, folks, that the core standards is not a curriculum. It's a standard. It's not a curriculum. That's not what teachers aren't going to open the core standards and say, okay, I'm going to teach today's lesson based on this standard. This has to be now translated into curriculum and further translated into instructional materials and techniques. So there's a lot of work that has yet to be done here. And my concern is that all those states that you saw on that map that rushed to sign up for the Common Core standards to get the money, well, now they're not getting the money. So I'm wondering how many of them are going to say, bye-bye core standards. No money, no standards. So what was going, I think, in a very positive direction may be derailed by the federal government intruding again into something that they should have just stayed out of. Right? So we're talking here about the standards. Let me, before I run out of time, turn to some of the issues that you're having here in New York. And that's and I'm going to just be up here because you're going to have a panel that's going to get deep into the issue. But you know, your professional performance reviews, this is becoming, I think, an opportunity across the country. And Randy Weingarten and I just announced last week in Washington that we're going to work together, superintendents and the teacher union. We're going to work together, and I think this is a great step on the part of Randy. We're going to work together to devise a due process system that will allow a superintendent or board of education to get rid of an ineffective teacher within a 100-day period. Okay? Now, this is almost too good to be true, and it probably is too good to be true. But the fact that Randy and her people are putting this out on the table and are willing to work on developing guidelines for their membership around the country to do that, I'm sure to a large extent is driven by what's going on in Wisconsin, Ohio, Indiana, and other states around the country, states that are trying to curtail seniority and tenure and collective bargaining. And she finds that it's necessary for the AFT to take a positive step in the right direction. But if she's willing to take that step, we're willing to take it with her and to work with her in developing a process that I think would make it much easier for school districts around the country to deal with an ineffective teacher, as opposed to the process that we have to. I mean, I fondly remember 3028 hearings in the state of New York. It was one of the best things that I ever did while I was a superintendent in New York. So there's certainly room for improvement, but you'll hear, but there is a need. And by the way, the basis for this is to focus not so much on the getting rid of the ineffective teacher as the Finland model, which is providing professional development opportunities for teachers, ensuring that we have the best teachers in the classroom, and getting away from this mentality that when you hire a teacher, you know, they know how to do it all and they don't need any additional support or professional development. So that would be part and parcel of this particular process. And you know, this is basically what the law requires. You'll hear about this. And then my friend, Andrew Cuomo. Back in 1994, when I was the superintendent of the Western Suffolk BOCES, his dad, Mario, put through a bill that was approved by the New York State legislature to cap BOCES salaries. And the reason for that was that the gentleman who preceded me in the job that I happened to take, talk about luck, right, was Ed Murphy. The infamous Ed Murphy, who retired and put in for a retirement benefit of $300,000 a year. Now this is going back to like 1992. Okay, in 1992, nobody made $300,000 a year in any school system, and certainly didn't get paid that as a retirement. So Mario Cuomo went ballistic when he heard about it, and as a result of that, you know, he got the legislature to agree, and district superintendent salaries went down to $128,620. I remember it, down to the dollar. I remember it because I was making considerably more than that when that law was passed. Well, you know, I lasted about 3 years on the job and then left to go to Fairfax County, Virginia, as did many of my colleagues. Now, since then, I believe that that has been changed, and BOCES salaries have increased somewhat, but not anywhere near what the component district superintendents are making. But the issue here is that, you know, you're picking on the superintendent, and I don't want to sound like poor babies, the superintendents, because they can take care of themselves. But you know what? These are the only employees that work at the will of the Board of Education. Okay, they don't get tenure, they don't get seniority. They don't, you know, the average tenure of a superintendent around the country is 3 years, for God's sakes. They're migrant workers. But these are the folks that we're going to pick on, you know. Big, bold governor is going to show education that we mean business. We're going to cap the salary of superintendents, and as soon as we do that, then boards of education are going to be coward, and they're going to cap the salaries of teachers and everybody else in the school system. Like hell they are. So, you know, this is the kind of phony reform that's going on around the country that is doing nothing substantial to help education, but is doing everything to create the kind of adversarial relationship amongst ourselves and amongst the public that thinks that we're doing a lousy job. So that instead of praising a system that consistently does the best for kids regardless, because you know what? 2 years from now, with lower spending per pupil, probably from years, guess what? We're still going to be going out of our way, and you will, in your classrooms and your schools and your buildings, to make sure that these kids get the best education possible. But after you break your back to do that for the kids, they'll say, you see, we told you they didn't need that money. We told you they could do it for less. And that's the reward that we're going to get. So we're at a point in time, ladies and gentlemen, where it's up to us. There are no champions out there. There really are no supermen for us. So we don't need to wait for them. We need to do it. We have to be the ones that stand up for public education, and more importantly than that, to stand up for our children. Thank you. Now, Walter tells me that if I want to be fed tonight, I also have to answer questions. So I'd be more than happy to do that. Any of you that have any questions. Yes, ma'am?
Yeah, I was very Excuse me, could we all, because we're taping this, perhaps we could repeat it, and there's actually a mic over here if you want to use that, but we could repeat it.
My name is Rosemary Uzo. I'm actually here today as an advocate. I'm part of an advocacy group called Lower Hudson Valley Union Administration. And we're having our next meeting on May 9th, which everybody's interested in the Marriott, but that's not the question. The question is...
that's the commercial. That's good.
Well, you know, we do need commercials once in a while, and I was very interested in your last comment, which said that, you know, together we're going to do it. So what I'd like to know is what advocacy steps do you recommend that those of us that are on the front lines every day do, so that we can support your mission and the issues that you have prioritized?
That's a great question. The question again, so everybody hears it, is what advocacy role can you guys play, you know, to help with this? Well, I think first and foremost, you know, I'm trying to, I've got a presentation. It wasn't the topic of my presentation, but I alluded to it. I call it the 95-5 dilemma, where 95% of our performing schools are defined by the 5% that aren't. I'd be more than happy to share that with you. But so that's what I'm doing at the national level. I think what has to happen is that then that has to be done at the state level. Yeah, in New York State, I bet you that if you look at New York State statistics and performance, et cetera, you're going to see, again, very positive things that have happened in the state of New York. And then at the local level, where at the local level you have to go out and you're the one that has to bring out the good things that are happening in your community. And you know, one of the points that I'm making in 95-5 is that the recent poll, the Gallup poll that is done every year in terms of people's attitude to education, this year 78% of people that have children in school gave their schools a rating of A or B, and that's the highest ever. That's another highest ever. It's never been lower. So the attitude of parents with kids in school is very positive. But when they ask the public in general, only 17%. Well, hell, 80% of them don't have kids in school, so what's the basis for their rating? It's what they hear in the news. So you're the ones, we're the ones that have to get the word out about our schools and the work that, you know, our teachers and administrators are doing in our schools, because if we don't do it, nobody will. So we have to, I'll do it at the national, somebody here has to do it at the state, and you have to do it in each of your communities. A great question. Yes, sir.
Hi, Charles Covington. My question is basically on the APPR. Do you think there's any opportunity where that can be developed or used on a second level change? In other words, a positive input for student improvement.
Maybe you should define APPR. You know, sometimes may not be aware of what APPR is.
That's the APPR is your professional evaluation. Yeah. No, I think that that's a. But here's the problem with that. I think that it is absolutely a great step towards reform. Because again, too much, you know, when people in Washington ask me why are evaluations so lousy, I say, well, because nobody thinks that they mean anything. Why are you going to give a teacher a poor evaluation if you can't fire them? I mean, because if evaluation is going to hinge just on employment and firing, then it's not doing the job. You know, professional evaluation has to deal primarily with professional development and analyzing what teachers do in the classroom to improve what they do in the classroom and make better teachers out of them. So if that process can go there, it'll make the difference. But all of us here know that it takes money to do that. Okay, and how are we going to do that realistically? How are we going to do that for real at a time when there's no money and budgets are being cut? You know, how are we going to do like Finland does and provide all of our teachers with 2 to 3 weeks of professional development a year? You know, when we scoff at letting them out of school for 1 day, that's going to be the problem that we're going to face realistically. If it's a great idea, but show me the money. Yes.
Are there other questions for Dan that you'd like to ask? Any more questions? Yes, Bill.
When ESEA or NCLB is reauthorized in the near future, what do you expect are going to be some of the significant changes in that legislation?
Well, first of all, let me tell you that I don't foresee ESEA being reauthorized. It's not going to happen this year. It's not going to happen next year because it's an election year. So if it's going to happen, it's probably going to be with either Mr. Obama in his second term or whoever is president after that. And one of the things that we're pushing strongly right now with Congress and with the administration is relief, regulatory relief. And they keep telling us, oh no, but we need to reauthorize ESES. And you've been telling me that now for 3 years. And nothing's happened. And school districts are still weighed under by all the No Child Left Behind requirements. You still have to make adequate yearly progress. You still have to provide supplemental educational services and choice and everything else. And now on top of that, you're going to get hit with this volume of requirements from the stabilization fund on top of that. So you're killing us. So it's not going to happen, so grant us some regulatory relief. And that's the battle that we're engaging on now. If it did happen, frankly, if you've seen the blueprint for education, I like it. Okay, they're going to do away with AYP. They're going to move towards growth as the evaluation model. They're going to allow the schools that are performing well flexibility from a lot of these rules and regulations. It's very nice, if and when it happens. And it's not happening now, and I don't see it happening anytime soon.
Is there one more question before we move on? Because we have a jammed agenda. Anyone else like to ask a different question of Dan? Because Dan will be here as part of the panel later on, wrapping everything up in a kind of holistic, interconnected way. So that'll be, that will be great.
What the hell does that mean? No, what he said. Thank you again, folks.
Thank you.